Views and news.
With Sarah Jane Makwala King, in for Clarence Ford.
Without further ado, absolutely thrilled that it is a Friday, which means that we chat to Dr. Chris Smith, also known as the Naked Scientist, consultant virologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, to talk to us about, or to rather to answer a variety of your questions. Good morning to you, Dr. Chris. How are you?
Oh, hi, Sarah Jane. I'm very good. How are your horse impressions?
Pretty poor. Why?
Well, no, I was going to say, can you do me a whinny noise? Imitate a horse. And I'm not trying to take the rip, but I need it to tell you about a really cool story, which I spoke to someone about yesterday. Do your best impression. No, you can do better than that. Go on.
Now you're just, now you are.
Okay, all right. Everyone knows the sound a horse whinny makes, right? If you break it down and look carefully, you actually see that unlike us when we're speaking, where we're actually speaking at one frequency with what we call harmonics on top, actually, if you record a horse and then you look at the waveform, you'll see there are two sounds in there, two totally different independent frequencies. That high-pitched one and then the low-pitched grunty bit that kind of goes at the end.
Oh, that's my favourite bit.
Now, how on earth can a horse with a voice box like ours talk at two different frequencies at the same time? That was baffling researchers at the University of Vienna in Austria. They went to find out. And there's a paper in the journal Current Biology this week where they've actually cracked this nut. And they did it by using horse voice boxes from animals that had died and also looking at live, awake, active horses with an endoscope, a camera you can pass up a nostril, down the throat, and you can have a look at the voice box. And they have solved the problem because, just as you would expect, a horse is a big animal, so it does have a low frequency. Big animals tend to make low frequency sounds. It's a way of conveying in nature, you are big, stay out of my way, I might hurt you. But also, so you'd expect that, and that's made the same way that I'm speaking to you. I've got air coming out of my chest, it's passing over vibrating vocal cords. Those vibrations are then amplified in the mouth, and I speak. Horses do the same thing. They don't talk, obviously, although things do come from the horse's mouth, especially on this programme. But that high-pitched noise, how does that happen? And what the researchers have found is the horse whistles in its throat. As the sound issues through the vocal tract, it is just like me going like that. So the high-pitched part of the horse is a whistle, and the low frequency is the horse talking, just like you and me. And it looks like other members of that family probably work the same way. And I asked one of the researchers, well, which other members are in that family? And he told me that rhinos are quite closely related to horses. What? So then I said, well, you're going to go and endoscope a rhino to see what that does. And he said, no, we're not going to do that.
No,
but they think it's probably the same thing. So interesting that this aspect of biology has evolved in this way. And a whole group of animals probably use these sounds, one high-pitched perhaps to communicate over longer distances in areas where high frequencies vibrate round and echo off of mountainsides quite well, for example, low frequency to convey your size, importance, stature and scariness so you don't become someone else's lunch.
The complexity and nuances and intricacies of the natural world never ceases to amaze me. It actually blows my mind. That is fascinating. How bizarre. I grew up with horses, so that was very, very interesting to me. Thank you for that, Dr. Chris. We are going to move on to a dietary question, which Wesley has sent in on the WhatsApp line. It's a voice note. Let's take a listen.
Good morning. Just a question for the Naked Scientist. With reactive IBS, which is something that I've suffered with for my entire life, there are so many different opinions on what your diet should be and how it should be. I'm still trying to understand how it works. I know mine is triggered by stress. What is reactive IBS or reaction IBS, as my doctor told me?
Very interesting point, this. And many people are surprised when they get stressed and then they find that they get symptoms like IBS. But actually, it's perfectly normal if you think about it. There are enormous numbers of nerves in our intestines, and you develop something called a bowel habit. Everyone generally has a time of day when they tend to go, a time of day when they feel hungry, a time of day when they don't feel hungry. And this is because your intestine learns your habits. It receives signals coming down from the brain that guide those habits, and the intestine is also full of trillions, literally trillions, of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, and other parasites. And together, this whole assemblage of an environment, a nervous system, which you have an enteric nervous system, the food that's going in it, and the microbes, the community of microbes that are in there, together leads to a pattern of bowel behaviour. And if you feed your microbiome with stress signals from the nerves coming down from the brain, this affects the chemistry of your intestine because digestive juice composition is going to change. The rate at which you produce that is going to change. The types of foods you tend to eat when you're stressed are going to change. The frequency with which you eat things is going to change. All this upsets that nervous system interaction with the microbiome and the chemical environment of the gut. And unsurprisingly, when we're in that situation, we tend to get symptoms because you're making things continue to change and you break the habit of a lifetime and you upset the apple cart. And people are quite surprised when you get stressed and then they see these sort of external manifestations of that stress. But it's actually quite unsurprising, really, when you think, well, when you change your behaviour because you're stressed, you change the way your body is working. And in some people, it manifests as gut problems. In other people, stress can take the form of muscle tremors or muscle twitches, or you can't sleep properly, you sleep too much, sleep too little, eat too much, eat too little, drink too much, drink too little. So there's a whole range of ways that psychological distress has a visual and realistic manifestation elsewhere in the body, and this is just one of them. And probably the best evidence that your gut and your brain are connected is everyone has had that sinking feeling, in inverted commas, when someone gives you some bad news and you feel yourself turn cold and you get that sensation like butterflies in your stomach. You also get that when you're highly excited. This is the nervous system, your brain sending signals down to the nervous system in your gut and either revving things up or turning things off. And that sinking feeling is your stomach relaxing, your intestines relaxing as the fight or flight reaction kicks in because you sense danger and you don't want to be digesting your dinner. You want to be putting all the resources into running away. And that's why you get that sinking feeling. But that is just the beginning of that stress manifestation of how external cues affect your thought processes, which in turn affect your bowel processes.
There we go. I hope that helps. That is fascinating. We're sticking with bodily stuff. And somebody asking, how is it that women who live together end up on the same menstrual cycle? This is a very interesting question that I have never fully understood. How does this happen? How do the bodies know? Chris?
Well, this is been the subject of research over a number of years because people do say, anecdotally, that large groups of women who live together tend to sync up, and you tend to find people in menstrual synchrony. And this was sufficiently intriguing that about 25 years ago, two researchers, and I remember their names, Kathleen Stone and Martha McClintock, I think it was, they actually did a study where they published this in the journal Nature, where they recruited large groups of women who had very regular periods and weren't taking any kind of external hormone contraception. And that's critical because if you take that, you are effectively clamping your hormone cycles to whatever's in the pill packet. So if you let nature take its course, and that was critical to this experiment, and you take samples from women, and what they did was to ask women who they knew very well what their menstrual cycle was, they got them to wear pads under their arms. So they were collecting effectively body secretions, and their hypothesis was that if there's some kind of synchronization going on, these women, the only contact they have is they share a living space, they share air. So perhaps there's a signal coming through the air that comes off of one person and into the nose of the other, and that has some effect on the way that the menstrual cycle works. So they collected body secretions, underarm secretions, from one group of women. They then go to a second group of women with equivalently regular, very regular menstrual cycles, not using any kind of contraception in the form of hormonal contraception. And they taped under the noses of the second group of women strips of the pads, suitably sterilised and deodorised, from the first group of women, and looked to see if there was any kind of impact on menstrual cycle. And guess what? There was. And depending upon where in the menstrual cycle of the first group of women they were when the samples were collected, and where in the menstrual cycle of the second group those women were when the samples were taped under their noses, you could move the onset of a period by quite a few days. And if you allow this, if you model this effect, this would have the effect of slowly forcing a group of women into menstrual synchrony. And the hypothesis is that there are pheromones, chemicals that may not be overtly obvious. You can't necessarily smell them and go, oh, I smell you. They are subconscious signals that you are nevertheless sensitive to via the nose. And they are connected via the nervous system to the hypothalamus, which is where you control your pituitary gland, which is where you control your fertility hormones, the FSH and LH that controls the menstrual cycle. The next question becomes, well, why on earth would such an effect exist? What would possibly be the benefit of a whole bunch of women going into menstrual synchrony? And the argument for that one would be that in evolutionary time, if you have a group of women who are getting pregnant together, it might make it easier to organise the way that we live our lives, because you can have a group of women who, if one of them can no longer look after a baby, dies, is killed, dies in childbirth. Childbirth statistics in some places in the world are terrifically bad for women. Then you've got somebody else who could pick up. A
lactating mother,
Correct. And so that's one argument for why having people falling pregnant at the same time, because they're likely to get pregnant at the same time, might help to make you, as a society, more resilient and more robust in the face of adversity. But it's just a hypothesis, but it is interesting.
Sure, it is fascinating. Dr. Chris Smith is with us, the Naked Scientist. You've got about 10 minutes left if you would like to put your question to. God, that's blown my mind. I love this one. Why do we sometimes get a sudden falling sensation just as we're drifting off to sleep? That is very odd, isn't it?
Yep.
When your stomach lurches. Yeah.
It used to happen to me more when I was little. I haven't had that happen quite so much.
Ditto.
As I've got older. So there's something about age. But the actual medical phenomenon is called hypnagogic hallucination. Hypnagogic, meaning as you go into a sleep phase, you have these bizarre experiences that aren't really happening to you. It's a hallucination. Now, we don't know why this is, but as you say, it tends to happen when you're just falling asleep. You can also sometimes get so-called hypnopompic hallucinations. You get funny experiences just as you're waking up as well. So it happens at both ends of the sleep cycle. But one possibility for this is when we go to sleep, we are paralyzed. There is a part of the nervous system which is in the brainstem, which is the bit that connects your spinal cord to the main part of your brain. And in the region known as the subcerulear region, there is a group of nerve cells there whose job it seems to be to gate the flow of information from the brain down to the spinal cord when we're sleeping, with the effect of paralysing you. Why does it do that? It doesn't paralyse everything. Obviously, you can still breathe and you can still move to an extent. We roll over in bed and so on. But its intention is to stop you acting out your dreams. So perhaps in younger people, where this system is just beginning to wire itself up and sort itself out, as we go into a dream stage, as we first fall asleep, perhaps when this engages this system and it starts to switch off your muscles, it creates that funny sensation of everything's falling because all your muscles are relaxing. And that makes you think you're falling because it makes you then dream you're falling. But it was that paralysis system kicking in to stop you acting out your dreams. Just a theory. We know the paralysis system exists, but why it should translate into those kind of funny sensations and hallucinations, that is, we're speculating, because of that paralysis system kicking in.
Isn't it strange? I used to suffer terribly from sleep paralysis in my sort of...
There you go.
When I was at university, and I initially didn't know what it was, and it was very, very unpleasant. But then I woke up one day and went straight to Dr. Google, of course, and put in my symptoms, thinking, that I was being possessed by the devil. And it wasn't that at all, obviously.
You still are possessed by the devil, but that was not the cause of this problem. Just for anyone who's wondering, sleep paralysis is slightly different in that with sleep paralysis, this is a complaint where people will, having been asleep, wake up, but it's as though that someone has literally separated their head from their body. You'll probably know, as you've experienced it. People are terrified because you wake up, you're awake, you think you're awake for ages, but you can't do anything, can't move. Probably that is a tiny, tiny slice of time. and it's just as the system disengages and gives you back your voluntary movement. But because we're seeing time distorted, and anything that's a bit scary, time tends to dilate. We tend to regard that time as much longer than it really is. It probably happens in a fraction or in an instant, and then you're fine. But it isn't harmful. And anyone who gets this, don't panic. This is natural, it's normal, and quite a few people do complain of this.
Dr. Chris, if Earth suddenly stopped spinning, what would happen first? Asks Louise in observatory.
Hi, Louise. Well, the reason that the planet is spinning is because everything in the universe spins. So the Earth has always been spinning because all the material that made Earth got together and was spinning. So that's where the spin came from in the first place. Earth is slowing down, but we're slowing down very, very slowly because we're losing energy to the moon, which is driving the moon further away from the Earth by a couple of centimetres a year. So the Earth is slowing down, but it would have very little opportunity to suddenly stop spinning. So let's reassure everyone, this isn't going to happen tomorrow. This is a thought experiment. But everything on the Earth is spinning with the Earth. So we're attached to the surface of the Earth because we're standing on it. So we are spinning as well. The water is spinning. The cars standing on the roads are all spinning. If the planet stopped spinning all of a sudden, all of those other things which are not fixed to the planet would still have that momentum. And therefore, it would be like you being on a roundabout and me suddenly stopping the roundabout. You would fly off at a tangent to the roundabout. Similarly, if you have a car accident, before the era of seatbelts, people were often thrown straight through the windscreen of their car and devastating injuries ensued. Why? Because the car might have stopped, but you have momentum because the car has given you momentum. If you're not attached to the car, you won't stop when the car does, so you're going to go flying off. So the minute the Earth stopped, everything that wasn't fixed to the Earth, and this would be the water, the cars, the people, everything, including the atmosphere, would try to go in a straight line at a tangent to the direction of the spin at that instant. So effectively you'd be ejected off into the atmosphere and into space, possibly.
That is, that which is terrifying. Wear your seatbelts, people. We've got time for one more. This is fascinating to me, and I'm so interested to know the answer. Are the people that we don't recognise in our dreams actual people that we've seen and our subconscious has stored their faces away? Or has our brain created people who don't even exist?
Probably a mixture of the two. We definitely dream about people we know, but
yes.
and we may not even know we know them. We may have seen their face somewhere, and our brain happens to have hung on to that memory and we summon
As
them
in,
up.
I walked past somebody at Sainsbury's the other 10 years ago, and my brain has saved that.
Possibly.
Somewhere.
But the way that
Bizarre.
the brain stores faces, you might think we have this massive library of faces in our heads. But it probably doesn't work like that, because the amount of data that you would have to store in a brain to store the thousands of faces that each of us probably carry in our heads would be an impossible neurological load. So psychologists theorise, and this was also a paper in Nature about 20 years ago, they theorise that the brain doesn't store faces per se. What it stores is a model of an ideal face, which is an average of all the faces we've ever seen, and it subtracts the face you're now looking at from the average and stores the differences. And this is why when you go to a country where people do not look like you, in other words, if I go to the Far East where I'm the only white guy, everybody looks the same. And it's not that people are being racist going, all foreigners look the same. Actually, to our brains, our average model of a face, if you live in a country where people are all one particular way of looking, when your brain tries to subtract the differences of someone who looks very different to you from the average, until your average is updated, everyone is a massive difference. And so your brain is fooled into thinking everyone looks very, very similar. And it's only when you've been in that milieu for long enough that your brain resets its average model of what a face looks like and subtracts correctly that you can then tell people apart with more accuracy and precision. That's the theory. Anyway, it's quite an intriguing one. But when we dream, your brain is plugging into that model of those differences and creating a face for you in some circumstances, but in other cases, you will summon up memories of people you have seen in the past. So it's a mixture.
So interesting. So interesting. And there we must leave it. Dr. Chris, an absolute treat. Always love standing in on a Friday because I get to chat to you and your incredible brain. It's 9:57. You're listening to Views and News.